We've got Mr. David Kruger here. He's been an active South Dakota Soil Health Coalition board member since January of 2022. He and his wife Nancy grow corn, soybeans, spring wheat, and the occasional winter wheat and rye near Twin Brooks, South Dakota, with their daughters Maggie and Katie. David attended Millbank High School and graduated from Lake Area Technical College in 1991 with a degree in ag production. He is a township supervisor, a Gideon's International member, and serves on the Lake Area Technical College No-Till Demonstration Farm Advisory Board and the Grant County Weed Board. David started using no-till practices in 1993 and began incorporating cover crops in 2010. He used strip tillage in the early years to help make the transition to no-till. He has also experimented with 60-inch corn. David's goals include focusing on the long-term picture of soil health and reducing wind and water erosion while increasing water infiltration rates. He believes the best definition of soil health is increased yields and profits while reducing inputs. Please help me welcome David Kruger to the stage.
Thank you, Tance. Well, good morning. Now we're working. Well, it's good to see everybody here. It's good to see such a large crowd that came to listen to me, and I'm not sure why everybody did that. So it's been a pleasure being on the board. I can tell you that it's a very dedicated board, dedicated employees, and Cindy and all the employees, all the work they do to put this on and everything else during the year, that it's been a pleasure being on the board. And there's one thing that I've learned on the board, and that's that the state of South Dakota has a lot of diversity. From one edge of the state to the other, it's a completely different world. And that's what I'm talking about today. I'm going to talk today about diversity. And my presentation's a little bit short, so I'm going to start out by just giving you a little bit of history about myself. And I think the history about myself is important, or maybe not myself, but about my farm is important, because I'm going to be comparing a corn, bean, wheat rotation to a corn, soybean rotation, and knowing how my land lays and what I'm comparing is important. So this picture on the screen here is a picture of where I live. I live right here. It's my grandfather's place. When I was 7 years old, my grandpa retired from farming, and my dad was not in the farming business. So I started working for a neighbor when I was 14, and he lived right up there. And he gave me a tremendous opportunity after I'd worked for him for a few years. He told me, if you work for me for about 20 years, I'm going to retire when I'm 50, and you can take over my operation. And how many farmers do you know that say they're going to retire when they're 50, when they're 30 years old? But this guy did. And so that's what I did. I worked for him. I graduated from Lake Area Votech. And at Lake Area, I had this teacher by the name of Jim Clindet, and he's sitting back here, and he introduced me to no-till. And, at the time, I thought, what interested me about no-till is we have a lot of rock, and we were always short of moisture in the spring. And I thought, well, if I can not work the ground and leave the rocks in the ground and maybe save a little moisture in the spring, that'd be a plus. I didn't even think about soil health. Well, 1993, I started no-tilling. 1994, we never had a dry spring after that. So I kept the rocks in the ground, but it's been wet ever since, I think, in the spring at least. So I started farming. My grandpa had 2 quarters, these 2 quarters right here. These 4 quarters up here were the guy that I worked for. And he allowed me to use his equipment on my land, and we traded labor for equipment. And everything worked just like he had said. He farmed until he was 50, and then I took over his operation. So I started no-tilling in 93. In 2000 is when he retired. And so then I continued adding land and no-tilling more land. And I'm going to compare a corn soybean rotation on this field right here, and that's a piece that I farmed that I started no-tilling in 1996. And I'm going to compare it to a corn bean rotation with tillage in this quarter. So the man I worked for, he was not in favor of no-till, and I have complete respect for the guy. I mean, he did everything. I wouldn't be here today without him, but he wasn't a fan of no-till, and he said, no, you're not going to it's not going to work on my land. How many times have you heard that? It won't work here. So I continued to do tillage on these 4 quarters up until 3 years ago. So I was 24 years since he retired. So I've been doing light tillage of some kind on these, and these 4 quarters have been in a corn bean rotation. All of this land here has been in a corn bean wheat rotation for the most part ever since the mid-90s. And so that's what I want to compare today. But I want you to know that I'm comparing a field side by side, identical soil types. And that's what's important to me on this. And that's why I shared what I did. Okay. So I chose, and I'm not the first one that did this, 7 years ago, what's in Iowa? The Soil Institute. Soil Institute in Iowa did a study on my 2 fields. And in my head, I knew I think I'm making money with wheat in the rotation. And every spring I have 2 questions. Are you going to raise wheat again? And yeah, I'm going to. And the next question is, can I buy your straw? No, you can't. You cannot buy my straw. I won't sell it. And you got to realize I'm not too far from Minnesota, so from my place east, it's corn bean, corn bean, corn bean. There's no wheat in the rotation. So I'm going to compare a corn bean rotation in conventionally tilled land. So I have 3 crops of corn, and I'm going to do it over 6 years. 3 crops of corn, 3 crops of beans, and I'm going to compare that to the field right beside it in a corn bean wheat rotation in a long-term no-till system. 2 years of corn, 2 years of beans, and 2 years of wheat. I'm not used to looking at a screen down here. I think I got to look up here. So I actually am going to use my own actual numbers. These are numbers from, these numbers were 3 years ago is when I made this presentation. So the actual income and expenses are my actual income and expenses from six years, starting 3 years ago and then going back 6 years. So these are my actual expenses from these fields. But what I want you to focus on first is the yield. I had to back up. There we go. Okay, what I want you to focus on first is the yield. Well, here. I'm trying to get the pointer up, and there we go. I'm hitting the wrong button. So on the corn bean rotation, which is up top, my APH 10-year average off of crop insurance is 176 on corn and 42 on soybeans. And in my corn bean wheat rotation, I have a 191 APH, 45 bushel beans, and 62 bushel wheat. And that's what I always noticed. The corn and the corn bean wheat rotation always yielded more. Hardly ever did the corn bean rotation do better than the fields that had wheat in the rotation. So I put the numbers to them, taking my actual numbers, cost of production off of each of these fields over those 6 years. In a corn bean rotation at $4.50 wheat, I was making $65.08 a year average. So 3 years, over the 3 years, I was making $195.23. In the bean rotation, $42 bushel bean average, $12 a bushel. I was losing $45.76 each year, average $137.29 over the 6 years. So if you do the math on that, over those 6 years, I was making $57.94. And you may wonder how, rent, I had the rent all at $180 on all these fields, so their rent is all the same. I have all of my living expenses in there. I have every expense I have when I do a break even, I add all of my expenses in. On the corn, bean, wheat rotation, 191 bushel yield times the 450, I was making $370 over the 6 years with the 2 rotations. 45 bushel beans, I was losing $5.22 over the 5 years. And wheat, over the 6 years with the 2 crops, I was losing $247.19. And I just about cut the total off the bottom. But over the 6 years, I was making $119.94. So as you can see in the 6-year rotation, I was making about $60 an acre more with wheat in the rotation compared to corn, bean in a conventional tilled. That doesn't sound like a huge number, but when you put $60 an acre on 2,000 acres times over 6 years, it's still a pretty big number. So now you may look at that and say, well, David, we don't have $4.50 corn, we don't have $12 beans. How would that work? How would that work today? So just for the fun of it, 2 weeks or a week ago, before we had this little rally in the grain market, I went into my spreadsheet and I put today's fertilizer prices, I put today's grain prices for new crop corn and beans and wheat, and I thought, well, let's see what it looks like today. So I'm using the same yields and $3.85 corn and $9.28 bean. If the prices stayed the same for the next 6 years, I'm going to lose. I don't want to look at that number, so I'm going to lose $695 over the next 6 years with a corn bean rotation in the tillage system. In the corn bean wheat rotation, I'm going to lose $472. So I'm going to lose either way, but still look at that difference. Corn bean wheat rotation, I'm still going to lose $220 less over the next 6 years compared to losing more money just doing a corn bean rotation. So you might wonder, how can that be? How can I be making more money with wheat in a rotation and losing money on the wheat? Well, the first thing that I notice is I have a reduced chemical bill in the corn bean wheat rotation. For up until the last 3 years, for 20 years, I never used a pre. I didn't need a pre with where the wheat was. Having the wheat in the rotation, more diversity, we were able to control our weeds better with more diversity of our chemicals, and we didn't, I don't know, all of you on the eastern side of the state know what water hemp is. My water hemp issue was just, I have water hemp, but it wasn't an issue like in the corn bean rotation. In the corn bean rotation with the tillage, I had to use pre's sooner, but for 20 years I never used pre's. That was a $10 to $15 savings. And even in season, the chemicals I have to use quite often I can get by a little cheaper. The second thing was cheaper corn seed. In the 3-crop rotation, I didn't need triple stack corn. A lot of times I just planted straight Roundup Ready corn, so that was a savings. Less fertilizer in the long-term no-till. After a number of years, we started using NDSU's recommendations for no-till, for fertilizer for no-till, and we've cut our N rates down, saving some money there. Basically, we're saving probably $20 to $25 an acre on N on our corn bean wheat rotation compared to the corn bean. And I continually try in the corn bean rotation to lower it. I'll do a test strip every year through those fields, and if I drop my N rates even half of what I'm dropping it in the no-till fields, I see a yield loss in the corn bean rotation. So we're seeing 15 bushel better beans, or 15 bushel better corn and 3 bushel better beans in the rotation. One of the things that to me is a big deal is the reduced salt issues in the soil. So both of these fields have high calcium calcium carbonates. We have a high pH soil. It's ranging in that 7.6, 7.8 area. And in the corn bean rotation, in the tillage, when I started farming that ground in '85, there was no white spots. As we've went through the last 30 years, we're starting to get white spots in that field where there's nothing growing. The field right beside it, we have the same pHs, the same test. Basically, they vary a little, but almost identical. And there I have salt issues, but I have something growing on every acre. And I think that wheat in the rotation is helping me manage that salt by keeping the ground covered, sucking some water out in the spring every third year. The cover crops might be helping, sucking a little more water out, but everything all together, even though there's salt issues there, I'm managing them. And you think about, and that on the field of the corn bean rotation, there might be 3 or 4 acres out of that field that don't grow anything. And right there is a yield loss. I mean, you take those 3, 4 acres that you're getting a 0 on, might be my 15 bushel an acre. I didn't do the math, but long term, that wheat in the rotation is helping me manage that salt issue. It opens the doors to cover crops and grazing livestock. And the one other thing that I didn't put in my dollar in my presentation about the break even is, I don't care what your diversity is. It doesn't have to be wheat, some kind of a small grain or whatever that diversity is, you have to learn how to sell it. And after I've learned how to sell spring wheat, you'd be surprised how often I actually make money with wheat too. I mean, I make money 50, 60% of the time. I've actually got a positive on that wheat number, not that negative. And I didn't show that in here because that's marketing, but you have to learn to market that third crop. You got to treat that third crop just like you treat corn and soybeans. It's just as important, and you can't forget about any portion of that. That crop has got to be just as important as your corn and bean crop. And the other thing is it spreads out my workload. And so that's really all I have. I'm free to shoot any question you want at me. As most people know, I don't know a whole lot about anything, but I'm very opinionated, so I probably got an opinion. So if you got questions, don't be afraid to holler. On the wheat acres, we spray nothing in the spring.
Hold up, David. The question for those of you that couldn't hear, are you using any herbicide on your wheat acres?
Yeah.
I'll come to you, so throw a hand in the air and I'll get to the area.
Yeah, the wheat program we use, we plant the wheat when the wheat's before tillering or right before tillering, we'll spray a wide match and 2,4-D on the wheat. And then after harvest, we'll spray usually gramoxone immediately following the combine and then try to get the cover crops in the same day behind the combine. At first, I didn't do that. I would wait 3 days to 7 days to try to get the cover crop in. And my struggle with cover crops is getting a stand because we usually get dry when we're combining wheat and then I don't have the moisture. I have the best success getting a cover crop started immediately behind the combine. So we gramoxone and then the cover crop. Before I started doing cover crops, then at the end of the season, we would do a Roundup 2,4-D bird down like October 1st. Since we've had cover crops, I've kind of backed off on that. One thing I didn't tell you was, so I've been in this corn, bean, wheat rotation for some of these fields 25 to 30 years, and if you've ever listened to Dwayne Beck, he'll tell you that if you repeat yourself long enough, Mother Nature's going to figure you out. Well, the last 4 to 5 years, I've been struggling with downy brome. Downy brome has figured me out. Every third year, I'm getting downy brome in the wheat. I can control downy brome in the corn and the beans, and there's nothing going to seed in there, but the downy brome comes in every third year. And so starting this year, I'm going to skip that rotation, and we're going to do a corn, bean, and skip the wheat one time, trying to get to get ahead of the downy brome. So I proved Dwayne right. You repeat yourself often enough, Mother Nature does figure you out. So, any other questions? We're going to give Tance some exercise today.
You've touched on it some, but I'm just kind of intrigued with the wheat part of it. You know, running our numbers, it always is negative, and you kind of showed that on your screen too. And if you have any more to say about that how it actually pencils positively in the scheme of things.
The reason it pencils is I'm looking at it from a long-term aspect, and I'm picking up yield, reduced expenses on the corn and beans. So wheat is not paying for me to plant it, but I'm picking it up on the back end because I'm getting higher yields, less cost. Just as an example, I just hit the numbers last night. So like my corn and a corn bean wheat rotation, my inputs are $64.70 less in the corn bean wheat rotation for this coming next year compared to the corn bean rotation. And my soybean inputs are about $20 less. So I have less expense, but I'm getting more yield. And that's where I'm picking up the difference. Plus, I think there's a lot of soil health benefits having that wheat in the rotation that's helping me in ways as far as water infiltration and things like that. Did that answer your question? Okay, but then when you want to go back to the profitability, what I talked about, the profitability that I didn't show here is the marketing end of it. And I don't care what crop you're selling, you got to have a market, and you have to, I guess with the help of some marketing people in our local elevator, we've learned to sell our wheat. We put it in the bin. Traditionally, from harvest until about this time of year, there'll be a 35 cent to 50 cent basis improvement, and there's usually carry in the market. So if we bin it, put the carry in the market, we can a lot of times add 50 to 80 cents a bushel onto our market price. And I've also learned to be very aggressive with a wheat market. So if I see what I feel is a profitable price, I plan to plant wheat every year, so I'll go out and sell 3 years worth of wheat if I see it at a profitable price. So I've got it pre-sold, add another 50 to 80 cents onto that, and you'd be surprised how often I make money with wheat. And I got a 62 bushel average. That means half of the time above that and half of the time below that. So when I'm above it, my break even comes down also. So it kind of goes. I had an old farmer once tell me, he says, you never make money with both wheat and corn. It's either one or the other. Either you have a good wheat year or a good corn year. And it's kind of some truth to that. If I have a lower corn yield, sometimes I've had a better wheat yield too. So sometimes they kind of offset each other that way too. So.
Do you incorporate any livestock in your operation?
I'm too lazy to have livestock, so. I have not. I had cattle when I was in my 20s, and me and cattle it definitely is not my strong suit, put it that way. We have planted cover crops. We have had a neighbor custom graves cover crops. I struggle with getting enough growth there that they want to bring them over, though. So we've done a little bit. I think there's a big benefit in it, but it hasn't fit in my program completely. So go ahead, Sandy.
So just reflecting on how much money you lose on wheat, would it be even hypothetically possible to put something else that you don't even put a lot of money into it, so that I'm just thinking either a full season cover crop and something where you're not going to have harvest expense, you're not going to fertilize, whatever. Or even what if you had either oats or wheat and you didn't even put fertilizer on it or spend the money on it, so then it loses less, but would it still give you that bump in the corn and and the soybean? I'm just trying to figure out the mechanism of why, and then even just make the wheat less of a loser.
So when you look at the wheat, as far as not fertilizing it, I don't think that's an option because quality and protein are so important in wheat that if you're going to do it, you got to try to do it right. Otherwise, you're going to get discounted. Now, I choose wheat right now because that's what I've been fairly successful with. But I 100% agree with what you're saying, and I'm always looking for other options. I've tried winter wheat, I've tried rye, and right now, spring wheat has still been my best, least amount to lose, put it that way. But I'm also looking. I've been playing with Kernza. I've got 20 acres of Kernza that I've been playing with, and that has not been successful because I'm not organic. But there seems to be a really good market for Kernza if it's organic, but the non-organic they don't want. I also planted camelina this fall, so I'm trying camelina. I think that might be an option down the road, but on the other hand, when you think about camelina, I don't know if it's going to have the soil health property benefits that the wheat is. Maybe it'll be better, I don't know. But like with the camelina, you could plant it in the fall, and if we can harvest it early enough, either I can double crop soybeans, or maybe I can plant millet and hay it, or maybe I can plant a full season cover behind that, and the camelina will break even, and then whatever I can do behind that might bring me a little more income that might be better than the wheat. So I 100% agree with you. I just haven't found out what that is at this point yet, and it takes time to, it takes a lot of research to figure out what that is, but I am also looking at just what you're saying doing. So. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's definitely an option. And I think that, it's interesting you brought that up again, because I was talking to somebody last night about that. How much income? Oh, he asked if I'd be interested in full season cover and possibly grazing. And I think that might be an opportunity too. I actually was visiting with a guy here last night, a couple different people, asking him how many acres would I need per pair on a full season cover crop, kind of thinking about those numbers, whether it would pencil out or not. And it sounds like it might be pretty close. So definitely.
Thanks for all the info, David. One question I have for you. In your comparison, you have corn versus bean, and then your corn, bean, wheat rotation. And the corn and bean rotation you had the tillage expenses in there, which would eat up a good chunk of the $60 difference. Do you have any comparisons on a corn bean no-till versus a corn bean wheat no-till? And what those numbers do?
I don't have that, nope.
Okay.
And I've thought the same thing. So is the wheat in the rotation what's giving me that bump, or is the no-till, or is it a combination? And I don't have that, can't answer that. I guess I don't have the answer, but I definitely think that wheat in the rotation, even a tillage system, is going to be a benefit. So let me add a little more to my story then. So the guy that I worked with, that I farmed for, that told me that I have to till his land, after 20 years, and I mean, he knows my land, he's farmed on it with me because we farmed together, and he's been across my land. He knows my land is just the same soil type as his. After 20 years, 3 years ago, he came to me and he said, "You better start planting wheat on mine too, because yours is doing better." And the following year, he came to me and he says, "Well, if you don't want to till it anymore, it's okay. I think you know what you're doing." So he is. It took him 20 years, but he did give me the okay now to quit tilling it. So
I'm so glad you said that, David. It proves that I'm not the only slow learner around. We are at 9:05 right now, but if we have one last brief question for David, then we'll hit a short break and do another breakout session. And if not, we got her right here, Holly.
Do you use cover crop on your corn, bean, or wheat acres?
We use cover crop. I've been doing cover crops for 15 years behind the wheat. I've played a little bit with rye in following soybeans going into corn, or the other way, following corn going into soybeans. I've done a little bit of winter wheat behind the corn into soybeans. I did 60-inch corn 2 years with cover crops in that, but I haven't had success where I'm doing it every year, that I'm consistently doing it. The rye in corn stalks, then planting the soybeans green is I really want to do this. And I've tried flying it on. I have the best luck drilling it after we harvest the corn, drilling it the 1st of November. I've had the best success getting a stand that way, but I struggle with, in the spring, we don't have the stand there. In the spring, our stands are even rye, and rye is tough to kill. Rye is tough, but I live on the eastern edge of the Coteau, and we have a lot of water pushing up in the spring, and our soils get 100% saturated. And I don't know if that 100% saturation is killing my rye, but I'll have patches of rye in the spring. It'll be a patch here and a patch over there and a patch over there. And it's so wide and there's nothing in between. And I love the theory, but I haven't figured out what I'm doing wrong. And I've tried flying it on. And then the other thing is, a lot of the land I farm, some of it's heavier and consistent, but where I'm at, I've got 10 soil types on a quarter, and I've got pure sand, and I've got heavy ground. And when I put that rye on there, it always grows on the sandy ground. And that's where I don't dare lose any moisture in the spring. I need that. So if that rye sucks the moisture out of the spring there, then I lose my moisture that I need to save. And on the wet ground, it doesn't grow. And that's just backwards of what I want. And so I've tried it 6 times maybe in the last 20 years, and I'm open to suggestions to help me out figure that out. So, all right, thank you.
Everyone, let's thank David for his time and expertise.